This is Garis masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 545, entitled FIP Women Don't Manslave Nor Divorce Rape. Description. This flyer explains why masculists put such enormous moral pressure on women to become FIPs or to rot on the shelf, viciously rejected by masculisted men, both socially and sexually. Most of the flyer is a tirade by a biconscious masculist against a monoconscious feminist, as the masculist explains the above to her. Fire itself. FIP women don't manslave nor divorce rape, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. There are powerful reasons why masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to FIP up, to become FIPs, that's financially independent persons, or be severely punished by men, that's masculisted men, who in time will be most men, by not getting one. Masculists label a woman who does not bother to FIP up a fluffy, based on the word fluff, which has connotations of being light, not serious, not adult, not responsible, not career competent, not FIP. Masculists have a real hatred of fluffies because masculists see them as manslavers who expect men to work for them for decades of men's lives just to get a bit of sex from them from time to time. Masculists reason that it was men who liberated women by freeing women up from household drudgery, by giving women science-based medicine, so that women now have a life expectancy of 85 years. Men gave women the pill, household gadgets, higher education, so women now choose to have typically 0, 1 or 2 kids, which are soon off their hands once they go to kindergarten and primary school. So women, even those who stay at home full-time looking after very small kids, still have a career window of half a century. So the masculists feel, on moral grounds, that women have a powerful moral obligation to get off their fat, parasitic asses and FIP up, so that they pull their own financial weight and not expect fluffy style to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man, thus manslaving him for decades of his life. Masculists see manslavery as the greatest of all gender crimes in either direction, in brackets, that is, men onto women or women onto men, and highly immoral. Masculists see manslavery as literally 1,000 times greater moral abomination than was Negro slavery in the 1800s in the US, because at the time there were several million Negro slaves, but there are today in the world several billion man-slaves, married to fluffy wives who do not bother to FIP up, who expect fluffy style to manslave a man for decades of his life. Masculists are so enraged, so hateful of manslavery, that we are at war against the fluffies, aiming to exterminate them slowly, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, thus forcing them to be manless, rotting on the shelf, loveless, sexless, babyless, and viciously rejected by masculisted men for being decades-lasting, man-slaving vermin, to be annihilated for being moral pygmies. Lost my place. for committing a gender crime that is 1,000 times more morally abhorrent than was Negro slavery. So when masculists come across feminists, monoconscious feminists, who, by definition, know nothing about masculist ideas, in brackets, so have only had their feminist consciousness raised, so are angry at men for the ways that feminism teaches them that men oppress women, that women are the victims and men are the victimizers, close brackets, masculists explode in rage at them for these monoconscious feminists' hypocritical bigotry, who feel, as feminists, that they have the right to lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, etc. But that men, masculists, don't have the same right to lash out at women for the ways that women oppress men, and in fact, worse, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades. For example, manslavery, divorce, rape, forced fathering, etc., which makes them much more serious gender crimes than even rape is by men against women. The masculists, the ways that men oppress women are seen as rather small beer compared to the ways that women oppress men, given that many of them last decades. So it's not surprising that when a monoconscious feminist confronts a biconscious masculist, in brackets, who by definition has had both his feminist and his masculist consciousnesses raised, close brackets, there will be verbal blows. The monoconscious feminist feels she has the right to be publicly misandrist, given all she has been taught by feminism, how men oppress women. And the biconscious masculist feels hateful towards the monoconscious ignorant bigotry of the feminist, seeing her antagonism of misogyny as hypocritical and bigoted, given that the biconscious masculist sees that women gender oppress men more. So he harangues her for her misandrous ignorance and tells her in verbally violent terms that women oppress men far worse, with women's decades-lasting gender crimes against men, with women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fatherhood, etc. He screams at her, and now begins a long quote. Quote, "Learn some masculism, you hated feminazi hypocritical cunt. You women oppress men far worse, with your many decades-lasting gender crimes against men, your manslavery, your divorce rape, your forced fathering. You women will get off your fat parasitic asses and FIP up, or you'll be severely punished by masculisted men by not getting one. A couple of years from now, you feminazi cunts will be feeling as though you've been hit by a bus, the masculist bus, as men become masculisted, getting infected with the masculist virus, who do not tolerate your monoconscious feminazi bitchery. We masculists have a hatred of you feminazis for what you are doing to one father in 4 in the hated fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts. You've made divorce so toxic for men that in many countries now, 2/3 of young men, and rising, refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves, living the MGTOW lifestyle, thus crashing the birth rate and wiping out whole populations. But these MGTOWs are merely reacting to the toxicity of divorce created by you hated fluffy feminist hypocrites who behave as feminists in the parliaments, wanting equal rights with men, but as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, rejecting equal obligations with men to share equally the burden of earning the living by bothering to get career-competent educations so that young women can be FIPs as adults and not expect to manslave a man for decades of his life. We masculists put tremendous moral pressure on you women to FIP up, or we exterminate you slowly by refusing to have relationships with you and denying you our sperm, forcing you to vote with men, to men-fair the gender laws, or you rot on the shelf. We masculists have a hatred of monoconscious feminists, whom we label MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, who remain closed-minded towards the idea that gender oppression is a two-way street, when in fact you women oppress men worse than vice versa. We masculists put great pressure on women to FIP up, so that women do not manslave a man for decades of his life, and so that she does not divorce rape a man in the hated fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts, ripping custody of his kids from him with a probability of 90%, losing his house to his fluffy ex-wife, half his wealth and stuff to her, forced to make child payments to his kids whom he will barely be allowed to see. And if his ex-wife is a real man-slaving fluffy parasite, he may have to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and FIP up, so she continues to manslave him after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. We masculists have a hatred of manslavers and divorce rapists, which is what masculists and MGTOWs call what happens to men in the hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce courts, that is, in quotes, divorce rape. Manslavery and divorce rape are not the only big, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men. Another big one in the big three of decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men is forced fathering, where a woman forces fatherhood onto him against his will, thus manslaving him for decades. A woman can lie to her boyfriend/husband that the kid growing in her... A woman can lie to her boyfriend/husband that she's taking the pill, but isn't, gets pregnant, then forces him to pay for the kid for decades, a massive gender crime against him. A woman can lie to her boyfriend/husband that the kid growing in her is his, when she knows it's from another man, thus forcing him to pay for decades of his life for a kid that is, in capital letters, not even his. These forced fatherhoods are massive gender crimes that women commit against men that are far worse than even rape is by men against women, because these big three gender crimes that women commit against men last decades, making them far more serious and hence should be and must be punished by law. So the masculists are pushing for the creation of a FIP society, that is, one in which both sexes are socialised and educated to be FIPs, especially young girls, so that fluffydom dies out, so that fluffies die out, so that all women are FIPs and expect to be FIPs, or they'll be viciously rejected by masculisted men, spat at for being vermin, that is, immoral, parasitic, man-slaving vermin, who are severely punished by men by being forced to rot on the shelf, manless and utterly socially and sexually rejected. To achieve all this, the masculists are pushing for the creation of GECs, that's gender equality committees, in the parliaments, consisting half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally. We masculists want the masculist half of these GECs to legislate the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, and the OPTAB, O-P-T-A-B, that's obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, to block forced fatherhood. The masculist half of these GECs will fundamentally reform the divorce courts, throwing out alimony, scrapping the halving of wealth and stuff, giving custody of the kids jointly to both parents by default, and operating on the principle of financial independence of both the divorcing parties, so that the divorcing father is not manslaved and divorce raped. And so the divorcing mother can afford to live on her own because she is a FIP. For all the above reasons, masculisted men put enormous moral pressure on women to get off their fat parasitic asses and FIP up, or they will be hated by the masculists and forced to rot on the shelf, viciously rejected by men, by masculists, by female masculists, by society, by biconscious social norms, and in time by the law. So, monoconscious feminazi, if you don't become biconscious pretty soon, you're going to feel as though you've been hit by a bus, the masculist bus, and it will crush you. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 540 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.